Right now, at this very moment, 5 systems are quietly failing, and the collapse of any single one of them is enough to trigger a food crisis that would leave 100 million people scrambling within 72 hours. Not next year, not if war breaks out. Right now, the process has already started, and most people have no idea because nobody is calling it what it actually is. They are calling it supply chain adjustments. They are calling it economic normalization. They are calling it policy reform. But strip away the language, and what you are looking at is the deliberate or catastrophic unwinding of the exact 5 pillars that have kept America fed for the last century. And when they go, not if, when the grocery store shelves will be empty inside of 3 days. The gas stations will run out of fuel for delivery trucks before the week is over. And the people who did not prepare will be standing in lines outside government distribution centers, begging for whatever is left. That is not a prediction. That is logistics. That is physics. That is the cold and motionless math of a system that was never designed to survive what is coming. Let us start with the first lifeline, because this one is already severed at the root and growing back, and nobody is watching it closely enough. The fertilizer pipeline. America grows food at scale because of synthetic nitrogen. Without it, crop yields collapse by 60 to 70% almost immediately. Not gradually. Not over a decade. Within a single growing season. The nitrogen cycle that feeds 330 million people depends on natural gas as its primary feedstock, and the infrastructure that delivers that natural gas to fertilizer plants is aging, underfunded, and increasingly vulnerable to both physical disruption and price volatility. When fertilizer becomes unavailable or unaffordable for large-scale farmers, which has already happened in waves over the last 3 years, farmers plant less, they rotate to lower-yield crops, they skip applications, and the harvest that follows is smaller. The one after that is smaller still. You do not feel it at the register on day 1. You feel it 6 months later when the shelves are suddenly thin and the prices are double, and the explanation you get is inflation. But inflation is just the word they use when supply cannot keep up with demand. And supply cannot keep up with demand because the fertilizer pipeline that nobody thought about is quietly fracturing. The second lifeline is water, and this one has a clock on it that is already counting down. The Ogallala Aquifer sits beneath 8 states in the Great Plains: Kansas, Nebraska, Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, New Mexico, and it irrigates roughly 30% of all groundwater-fed agriculture in the United States. Here is the brutal truth about the Ogallala. It took millions of years to fill, and we are draining it at a rate that is over 1,000 times faster than it naturally reaches. In some areas of West Texas, the aquifer is already gone. Farmers are drilling deeper and coming up dry. In other regions, they have maybe 10 to 20 years of water left before they have to abandon their fields entirely. That is not a fringe estimate from environmental activists. That is the Kansas Geological Survey. That is the USDA. That is the peer-reviewed science. When the Ogallala goes, the breadbasket of America stops producing the way it has for the last 80 years. And there is no backup plan. There is no replacement aquifer. There is no technology on the horizon that can fill that gap in time. What there is a slow machine detonation that is going to hit the food system like a freight train, and the only people who will be okay are the ones who already saw it coming. The third lifeline is the one that moves the food once it exists, and right now it is being dismantled, piece by piece, in a way that looks completely rational from the outside, and is actually catastrophic from the inside. The rural freight rail network, specifically the short-line railroads that connect farms and grain elevators to the main distribution arteries, has been shrinking for decades. Tracks get pulled up. Lines get abandoned. The agriculture that used to move by rail moves by truck now, and that matters because trucks require diesel, drivers, functioning roads, and just-in-time logistics coordination that breaks down almost immediately under any kind of shock. Pandemic, storm, fuel shortage, bridge closure, labor strike. Any one of these events introduces friction into the system, and the system has almost no slack in it. The average grocery store carries approximately 3 days of inventory. 3 days. That is not a buffer. That is a countdown timer. When the freight network gets disrupted, and it will get disrupted, because it is already operating at the edge of its capacity, the food that exists in warehouses and on farms cannot physically reach the people who need it. And people starve, not because there is no food in the country, but because the system for moving it has collapsed. The fourth lifeline is seeds, and this one is the most quietly terrifying of all because of what it reveals about the concentration of power in the modern food system. 60 years ago, American farmers saved seeds from one season to plant the next. It was how agriculture had worked for 10,000 years. Today, companies control roughly 60% of the global seed market, and the seeds they sell are often patented, often engineered to be sterile after one generation, and almost always optimized for industrial monoculture rather than resilience. What this means in practice is that the genetic diversity of the crops feeding America has collapsed to a degree that most people cannot comprehend. The Irish potato famine happened because the entire Irish potato crop was essentially a single genetic clone. When a pathogen found a way to kill it, there was no variation in the population to resist. What we have done to American corn, wheat, and soy is structurally identical to what Ireland did with potatoes, except at a scale orders of magnitude larger and with the added vulnerability that the seeds themselves are controlled by corporations that can raise prices, restrict access, or simply fail to deliver during a crisis. If a novel pathogen hits the dominant corn variety and plant pathogens evolve constantly, the loss could be catastrophic. And there is no seed library, no fallback position, no national strategic reserve of diverse cultivars waiting to be deployed. There is just a very thin, very fragile genetic thread holding the entire system together. The fifth lifeline is the one that connects all the others, and losing it means the collapse of everything simultaneously. It is the electrical grid, specifically as it relates to food production and cold chain logistics. Modern agriculture is electrified from end to end. The pumps that draw water from the Ogala run on electricity. The fertilizer plants run on electricity. The grain elevators run on electricity. The cold storage facilities that prevent food from rotting between harvest and table run on electricity. The processing plants, the packaging facilities, the distribution centers, all of it runs on electricity. And the American electrical grid is, by almost every metric that engineers use to measure such things, dangerously fragile. It was not designed for the climate it now operates in. Heat domes cause demand spikes that overwhelm capacity. Winter storms freeze natural gas pipelines and knock out thermal generation at exactly the moment people need heat the most. Cybersecurity vulnerabilities in the supervisory control systems that manage the grid have been documented by federal agencies and remain largely unaddressed. A coordinated attack, a catastrophic weather event, or even a cascading equipment failure during a peak demand period could take down large sections of the grid for weeks or months. And when the grid goes down, the cold chain breaks within hours. Food that was fine yesterday is unsafe to eat by tomorrow. The refrigerated trucks stop running. The processing plants go dark. The water pumps stop. And suddenly, a country that was feeding itself fine on Monday is facing a genuine famine by the following weekend. Now here is where most survival content fails you. It tells you to buy freeze-dried food and call it preparation. It tells you to store water and hope for the best. That is not preparation. That is a waiting room. Real preparation for a food system collapse is not about stockpiling. It is about building parallel systems that can function when the primary ones fail. The first thing you need to understand is that in the early days of a genuine collapse, the most dangerous place you can be is in a crowd of unprepared people. Grocery stores will be looted within hours. Distribution points will become choke points of desperation and violence. The science of crowd behavior under resource scarcity is not subtle. It shows rapid, predictable escalation from anxiety to aggression, and the people who survive that phase are the ones who are not there when it happens. Your goal in the first 72 hours is invisibility and self-sufficiency. That means your food supply cannot depend on any store, any delivery, any government distribution. It has to already exist where you are. But beyond the stockpile, which you absolutely do need, and it needs to be real food with real caloric density. Not just snack items, you need the skill set of a producer, not a consumer. Growing food is not complicated, but it requires lead time and practice. Soil chemistry is not mysterious. You need nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and organic matter. You can produce all of those from kitchen waste, wood ash, urine, and green plant matter if you know what you are doing. Rainwater collection is legal in most states and can be implemented in a single afternoon with basic hardware. Food preservation through lacto-fermentation requires nothing but salt, water, and vegetables. No electricity, no canning equipment, no specialized knowledge beyond the basic chemistry of anaerobic bacterial activity. These are not fringe skills. They are the baseline capabilities that every human being had 200 years ago, and most have, completely outsourced in the last 50. The psychological piece is the one that kills people who have done everything else right when a society begins to collapse. The cognitive load is overwhelming. Information is contradictory. Emotional stakes are extreme. Sleep is compromised. And the brain defaults to reactive decision-making instead of strategic planning. The research on high-stress decision-making is clear. People who have pre-committed to a plan and rehearsed it even mentally perform dramatically better than people who are making decisions in real time under pressure. This means your plan cannot live in your head as a vague intention. It has to be specific, written, and shared with the people who will execute it with you. It has to answer the questions you do not want to think about: who has access to your supplies, what the threshold is for leaving your location, where you go if you leave, and what you do if your primary plan fails. These are uncomfortable conversations that most people never have because the premise feels too extreme. But the premise is not extreme. The 5 systems described here are genuinely failing, and the window for preparation is not infinite. The timing of your actions matters as much as the actions themselves. The people who try to prepare when the crisis is already visible will find empty shelves, sold-out suppliers, and social chaos that makes logistical movement difficult or dangerous. The window for low-friction, affordable high-quality preparation is always before the event. After the event, everything costs more, everything is harder to get, and the social environment makes movement and acquisition dangerous. This is not a hypothetical. It has played out in every major food crisis in modern history. From the Soviet collapse to the Venezuelan economic implosion to the COVID supply chain disruptions, the pattern is always the same: slow build, invisible to most people, sudden acceleration, panic, scarcity, and then a new equilibrium that is substantially worse than what existed before. The people who are positioned before the acceleration are the ones who navigate it. Everyone else is reacting to a situation that is already beyond their control. Listen carefully, because this is the only warning you are going to get that comes before the moment it becomes obvious. The 5 lifelines, fertilizer, water, freight, seeds, and electricity, are not going to fail with an announcement. There will be no official declaration that the food system is breaking down. There will be price increases and supply disruptions and expert reassurances and political arguments. And then one day the cumulative weight of all those small failures will cross a threshold, and the system will not recover on its own schedule anymore. It will recover on physics, on chemistry, on the brutal math of calories available divided by mouths that need them. You do not get to negotiate with that math. You do not get to vote your way out of it or wait for someone else to solve it. You either have what you need before that moment arrives, or you are standing in the wrong line when it does. The difference between the person who survives what is coming and the person who does not is not luck, and it is not strength, and it is not government assistance. It is whether they looked at the evidence clearly, took it seriously, and acted before the rest of the world figured out what was already happening. That window is open right now. It will not stay open. Prepare accordingly.